Uh, how are you, my friend?
Well, I'm fine, and I know you want to talk about Macron's visit, but your discussion of Comey reminded me of what I think is the basic problem and what started him down the hill.
Okay.
Which is, and I actually wrote about this when he announced the decision about Hillary Clinton. What he should have done right at the beginning of that email investigation is he should have told Lynch, he should have said, look, I'll investigate this or not investigate it. You tell me not to investigate it, I won't, okay? It's your responsibility then. But if I investigate it, we're going to investigate this like any other case. And don't tell me to treat it any different. He should have said, if you make a political decision, you don't want this investigated, that's your right, that's your authority, you take the responsibility. But if I'm going to investigate this, we're going to investigate this the way the FBI does it, according to the protocols, one or the other.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Jim. I've watched Jim Comey over the last year and a half and walked away with the assumption that, and maybe this is, I didn't think the organization was supposed to be like this, but I've walked away with the impression that he's just as big a political animal as anybody else in Washington, D.C. And
it's not supposed to be like that. And it causes, what I said in this column was when he announced his decision, I said I was very afraid that all he's done is convince people that there aren't any honorable men left in the government of the United States. So, he tried to twist and turn to produce the result he thought his political masters wanted while being able to say that he had maintained his integrity. And it was clear to everybody. He ended up alienating everybody. And I think he began rolling downhill at that point, and it's been no stop ever since. And it's just, most of these career public servants are really pretty honorable people, at least the ones that I've encountered. And if you tell them, if you're the top-level political people, you make clear what your priorities are, most of them will do their best to accomplish it, even if they don't agree with you. I don't think most of them are serial leakers or part of a deep state or anything like that. But he has given credence to concerns people have about that by the way he's conducted himself.
Yeah.
And that's the real tragedy. And writing a book and all this self-serving stuff is not going to change what thoughtful people think about Jim Comey.
It's a great point. I appreciate it. Hey, I know you mentioned the visit by Macron, the French prime minister. I have to call you out here because I know that you've written an article on this, being critical of Melania Trump's clothing at the state dinner, and I just wasn't sure that Jim Talent was ever going to go there.
No, I didn't. Did I write an article?
I'm just kidding. That's all the national. That's all they. That's.
I sleepwalked, and wrote that article and didn't realize it. No, I wouldn't be competent to write an article about what she wore. Although I watched Project Runway a few times. I picked up a few fashion terms, silhouette and that sort of thing, the vibe and all of that. No, I mean, I thought it was. I'm developing a fair amount of respect for Macron, although I, disagree with a lot of what he's trying to do. But this is a smart thing, and he has a good relationship with Trump. We need friends on the continent, and he's actually, trying to forge some kind of a common policy. But the gulf between how he perceives the interests of the West and how the president does is pretty deep. And Trump has the leverage here because none of these Europeans, if Trump reimposes these sanctions and gets strict about them, the Europeans are going to have to choose between doing business with the United States and doing business with Iran. And that's the choice they don't want to have to make because, we know which way they're going to go.
Yeah.
So I hope the president stands strong here. It's fine to make some concessions that are, marginal or that help the Europeans to go along. And I'm sure that's what he's exploring, President Trump. But and I think it's really good that they talked, and I think it was helpful to both sides that he had that state visit.
Well, it's funny because I watched Chris Wallace, who we're going to have on the show later. I watched his interview with Macron, and I found out things about him that I didn't realize. That he joked about making France great again, and he's trying to get rid of the wealth tax, and he kind of realizes that when you've got the working population completely supporting the ones that have retired at age 50, that's math that doesn't work. It kind of gives you hope, but as you point out, there is a vast gulf between these two still, even though they have a few things in common.
Yeah, and particularly on the Iran issue, because I think President Trump recognizes that of all the threats currently growing in the Middle East, and there's a lot of them, the biggest as far as the United States is concerned is Iran. And it's because the Iranian regime has targeted us as the great Satan. I mean, they are trying to get us in every way that they possibly can, and they cannot be allowed to get nuclear weapons. They're trying to dominate the region. They're supporting terrorism throughout the region. Now, the Iranian regime is in trouble. I mean, the currency has really gone south on them. This bait and switch game they played with their people for the last 20 years, where they periodically put in place a quote-unquote moderate and hope that satisfies, the public dissension, isn't working anymore for them. So, and that's a factor that we need to take into account. But basically, a maximum pressure strategy is the right one there, and that's where Trump is headed. And I think, Macron and the others need to get on board.
Well, it's a great point. We're talking to former Senator Jim Talent. Speaking of which, there are parallels here with how the president's handled North Korea, and I'm interested. I know that you probably know Ambassador John Bolton, and what's your take on the impact having Bolton in this administration is going to have with these upcoming discussions on North Korea?
Well, John Bolton's a clear thinker. He focuses on standing up for America's interests, and he understands the byplay between power and diplomacy. I mean, people act like if you take strong positions and use the leverage and the power that you have, you're undermining diplomacy. It actually supports diplomacy. I mean, George Kennan said, I love this quote, he said, it's amazing how much easier diplomacy becomes when you have a little armed force in the background.
Yeah.
And Bolton understands that. He gets attacked for it, but it's a real mistake. Now, in terms of Korea, what the administration's done is by reacting and applying maximum pressure, they have encouraged the Chinese in the direction the Chinese were going in anyway. I think the Chinese are really beginning to view the North Korean regime as more trouble than it's worth, because the provocations from Kim Jongun have pushed the South Koreans closer to us. We've installed a missile defense there, which the Chinese don't like. It's given Prime Minister Abe in Japan a reason to step up their defense expenditures. The Chinese don't like that. It's causing us to forward base more forces in the Northwest Pacific. The Chinese don't like that. And they don't like the fact that Kim Jong-un is showing no respect to them. I mean, in 2013, he killed his uncle, who was China's man in Pyongyang.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And the Chinese take that sort of thing very sensitive. So the regime there in Beijing is starting to say, the juice isn't worth the squeeze with this guy. And I think that's what Xi Jinping told him when he visited, a few weeks ago. He said, if you can't figure out a way, I don't know what he said. It wasn't a fly in the wall, but I'm guessing he sent the message, if you can't figure out a way to back down from all of this, we don't need you. And I think that got their attention, hence their promise to stop, to freeze, hence their desire for a summit. So now we got to keep playing this hand strong. It would be the wrong time to back away, I think, because we're beginning to get results.
Couldn't agree with you more on that. Jim, we've seen Kim Jong-un's grandfather and his father do this at different times in the past. They claim they're going to negotiate, they're going to back off, they get people to drop some of the sanctions, things get a little better in North Korea, and then they go right back to the way they were.
Right.
Kim Jong-un seems to have taken that a step further by calling for an end to hostilities and saying he's okay with U.S. troops on the border. What's your take on that? Do you trust any of that out of this guy?
No, I don't. No. I don't trust any of it. But if you look underneath it, what it says is that he's feeling the pressure. In other words, that the policy is working.
Yeah.
So, the first thing the Trump administration said when they started discussing the summit was, "Look, we're not giving you anything until you perform," and that's the key. In other words, if there can be some carrots with this, but first you have to satisfy us that you have complied with our demands, which means breaking down his nuclear infrastructure and showing us that he's done it. So as long as we don't give them the benefits until after we've gotten the performance, I'm okay with talking with them. And I think the Trump administration has clearly signaled that that's, that they're not going to play Charlie Brown, to his Lucy with the football.
Yeah. Jim, before I let you go, I just saw some breaking news that came over. Ronny Jackson, the Admiral, has just announced he's withdrawing himself as the VA Secretary nominee. I guess you could kind of see the pressure building on him the last couple of days, even though he denied everything. Boy, it is rough and tumble in Washington, D.C. right now.
Right, and he's not a political, right? I mean, he's, this is all new to him, and so he looked down, the quarter of the next 6 months and what he was going to go through, and he said it's not worth it, which is how, normal, well-adjusted people probably do respond. So I don't blame him. I'm not saying I believe anything that's been said about him, but, he's got a distinguished career, and he doesn't want to put all that up. He doesn't want to put himself in that position, so it's hard to blame him. And, the White House will go back to the drawing board. This happens. You're not going to get all your nominees.
Yeah.
Nobody does, so the president will figure it out and get somebody else.
Jim Talent, proud to have you as part of the program. Thank you.
Good to talk with you, Mark.
You bet. We'll talk next week. Appreciate that. That is former Senator Jim Talent.